Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to create a countdown timer so that the player knows how much time they have to wait before they can start moving their tank around and blowing stuff up. So we're going to show the time left in the countdown timer until the game starts. So let's hop into the editor and start doing this. Now I'm here in our widget blueprint, WBP Start Game Widget, and this is the widget editor as we've seen, but you may have noticed at the top right, there are two tabs here, one that says Designer, that's what we're in right now, and one that says Graph. And if you click on Graph, it looks more like a Blueprint event graph with event nodes and a My Blueprint tab here with various sections, and this is where we can do Blueprint logic. Now we have three nodes here. We have event preconstruct. This is similar to a constructor in C++. And then we have event construct, which is similar to begin play. So this is where it's more appropriate to do things at the beginning of the game because all relevant classes are constructed by this point. And then we have event tick. And just like the tick function in C++, we have access to delta time here. Now, we're not going to use the first two nodes, so I'm going to highlight those and delete them, and we're going to use event tick. Now, our goal for this video is to show how much time is left, and we have a 3-second countdown timer. Now, in C++, we created a timer handle, and we used the World Timer Manager to start a timer. Everything we do here in Blueprints is independent of that. We're creating a completely different system of logic here, and it's just going to coincide with that timer that we set in C++. So this is all different and independent from the C++ side. Now here in WBP Start Game Widget, we can add variables just like we can add variables in C++. Right here under my blueprint, I can click Add New and select Variable, and now I have a variable called newVar_0. And down here in the details panel, which is confusingly on the left side now, we have the variable name and variable type. Now, it's highlighted by default because it's just expected that you're going to rename your variables as soon as you create them. So we don't need this default name. We're going to call this our own name. I'm going to call it countdown. And countdown is going to be a float variable. Why? Because this is going to keep track of how much time we have left. I'm going to start it off at 3 seconds, and each frame I'm going to subtract the amount of time that's passed since the previous frame, so we get a countdown going from 3 downwards. Now, I'm going to click Compile. Now, as soon as I click Compile, I can give this a default value by scrolling down in the Details panel. It's set to 0 by default. I'm going to set it to 3 by default, since we have a 3-second countdown time. Now, as it stands, this is just a float called countdown with a value of 3. We haven't actually changed it, but every single frame of the game, I'd like to subtract away delta time, which is the amount of time that's passed since the previous frame. And that way, countdown will constantly be updating, decrementing by delta time, so that we have a running time count. Now, here's how we can do that. I'm going to take countdown from our My Blueprint tab, click and drag it here into the event graph and release. Now, as soon as I release, I have two options, Get Countdown and Set Countdown. If I click Get Countdown, now I have the countdown node, and if I click and drag out of its output, this gives me access to the value of countdown. Now, I can also click on countdown, drag in, and click Set Countdown, and we have a set node. We've seen these both before in earlier videos. The input pin for the setter allows us to plug in a float value, and then countdown will be set to that value. So how do we actually subtract delta time away from countdown and then set that to the countdown value? Well, we can take our countdown node here, and I can click and drag off of it and type the minus symbol on my keyboard, and I have a number of options here, one of which is float minus float. If I select that, then I now have a float minus float, or a subtraction node. You'll see that it says target is Kismet Math Library. That tells you that Kismet Math Library underpins this node. All nodes have C++ code at their core. So what this node does is it takes two inputs. it takes a float input and it takes a second float input. By default, it's set to 1, so if you don't plug anything in, then it's going to take the first value and subtract 1 from it, and then return the result. Now, it's not going to change any of the variables we're passing in. It's simply going to perform a calculation and return that value that is the result of the subtraction. Now, I'd like to take countdown and subtract delta time from it. So I can take the output pin called in delta time from the event tick node and plug that straight in to the second input in my subtraction node. So what I'm doing is I'm taking countdown minus delta time, and then this gets the result. Now, initially countdown is 3 seconds, and delta time is a very small value. It's the amount of time in seconds that's passed since the last frame. So this will be a tiny amount. So what will result the first time this is executed is 3 minus a tiny amount. And what I'd like to do is set the value of countdown equal to that result every single frame. So each frame, countdown is being subtracted from little by little, and that way it will keep the countdown from 3 seconds going downward. So I'm going to take the return result from this subtraction node and plug it into the input for the set countdown node. Now, this isn't going to do anything if I don't connect the execution wire from the event tick execution pin to the input pin for set countdown. So now what this is doing is every single frame subtracting delta time from countdown, taking that result and setting countdown to that new value. Now we can see how this behaves with the print string node. So I'm going to drag off of the setter, type print string, and get a print string node. And then I'd like to print the value of countdown. So I can take the return value from the setter, which will give us the new value of countdown each frame, and plug it into the in string node. And notice I see a convert float to string. And if I release, now I get a conversion node that will take my float, convert it to a string, and now we can print that to the screen. Now let's see what happens if I press play. Check that out. We see that count is being decremented each frame, and we're spamming the screen with the value of countdown, and it's getting more and more negative. So this is the first step to getting our countdown timer working. I'm going to close this. Now, we saw that we're printing a float value, which has a bunch of decimal points. And once we print the value to the screen, we don't really want decimal points. We'd like an integer. So I'd like to see the amount of seconds left without those trailing digits to the right of the decimal point. So what I need is an integer. Well, what I can do is I'm going to delete this conversion node, and I'm going to take the result of the countdown setter, and I'm going to type CEIL, ceil, which is short for ceiling. The ceiling operation is going to take a float value and round it up to the nearest integer. So if we're at 3, well, there's no need to round. It's going to return an integer with a value 3. But if we're at 2.9, for example, then the ceil node is going to round it up to 3. And as that value decreases, it's going to continue returning 3 until we get down to 2. So we're always going to get an integer. Now I can plug this into print string, and you'll see that it says convert integer to string. So now the ceil node is taking a float, rounding it up to the nearest integer, and returning that integer value. So now if I hit play, we'll see that we get 3, 2, 1, and 0. And of course, it continues going down because we never tell this to actually stop. But this is a great start because now we have access to the number of seconds left, and we can print something to the screen in response. So how are we going to print the correct message to the screen? What I'd like to do is when we have 3 seconds left, I'd like the widget to say get ready. When we have 2 seconds left, I'd like it to show the number 2. When we have 1 second left, I'd like to show the number 1. And when we have 0 seconds left, I'd like the text to say go. Well, we can do this with a switch node. Switch nodes can switch on a number of different types, including int. Now, the way that a switch on int node works is it has a number of cases for a number of values, and based on the value that we pass into this switch node, it will do one of a number of things. For example, if we pass in the integer value 3, then we get the 3 case, which will result in thing 3 being carried out. So the switch on int node has multiple lines of execution, and it will only execute one of them based on the input. Now we can use a switch on int node and pass in an integer, for example, the result of our ceil node. So I'm going to remove the print string, and I'm going to drag off of the countdown node and type switch on int and select switch on int. Now notice it takes an input of type integer. I'm going to pass in the return value from the ceil node. And also notice that we have an add pin option. If we click on that, you'll see that we get a default pin in addition to the output that says 0. What this says is if we hook up some blueprint logic from the 0 execution pin, then that logic will be executed if the input value passed in is 0. And if it's not, well then it will default to this execution pin. Now we can click add pin again, and now we have 0 and 1. So we can have 2 lines of execution, one for 0 and one for 1, and then if the input is not 0 or 1, then whatever's hooked up to default will be executed. I'm going to click plus again 2 more times, so we have cases 0 through 3 and a default case. So now it's up to us to drag off of this and add some blueprint logic that we would like executed based on the value passed in that we're getting from this ceil node. And that's what I'd like you to do for your challenge. I'd like you to print different messages for each case using a print string node. For the value 3, you can print get ready using a print string node. For the 2 case, you can simply print the value 2. For the 1 case, you can print 1. And for the 0 case, you can print go. Now for the default case, simply print start game with our print string node. Pause the video and add a whole bunch of print string nodes in the event graph now. Okay, so I'd like to go ahead and use a print string node, and I'm going to start down here at the bottom for the default case, and I'm going to type print string, and the string I'd like to print is start game. Now here's a shortcut if you didn't know. With the print string node selected, I can hover my mouse somewhere else in the event graph and hit Control W, and that will copy the node that I had selected. I'm going to hook up the 3 case to this print string node, and I'm going to type get ready, so when the input to the switch is 3, we'll see get ready printed to the screen. Now I'm going to Control W again and hook this up to the 2 case, and for 2, I'm simply going to print 2. Now I'm going to copy the print string node, and for 1, I'm going to print the value 1. And finally, one last print string node here is going to be hooked up to the 0 case, and this is going to say go. Okay, so let's go ahead and compile this, and I'm going to hit play, and now I see get ready, 2, 1, and go. And then of course we see start game once we've ran out of time. So we know that the value is decreasing and becoming more and more negative, but that is the default case for our switch. And that's when we know we can actually start the game. So this is the first step to showing our countdown timer in our widget. We're not quite changing the text that says get ready just yet, but we'll be doing that soon. So in this video, we created countdown logic and added that to our widget blueprint. We used print string to show our countdown values and print a different message based on our countdown values. We still need to set the text in the widget, and we're going to do that in the next video. I'll see you soon.